Foundation in the INHABITANTS Center. We welcome you to the 6th Daya Krishna Memorial Lecture. We have in the foundation instituted 8 memorial lectures named after Kumar Gandhar, Habib Tanveer, B.S. Gaitonde, Dr. Daya Krishna, Agge, Kenucharan Mahapatra, Charles Correa. These lectures are aimed at creating critical thinking around music, theatre, ideas, literature, cinema, Maniko, yes, cinema, architecture, etc. Dr. Daya Krishna was one of the most outstanding philosophers in post-independent India. And his entire life as a philosopher was devoted to questioning the given notions of reality, culture, aesthetics, etc. Unusually interested in literature, philosophers don't seem to be interested in contemporaneous literature in India. But he was deeply interested. That's why he had a large number of Hindi and other writers who were his close friends. And he was interested in many Indian traditions of thought and aesthetics, civilizational vision, etc. He embodied what can be called contrary thinking, which is the name of a book also of his essays, which is published from the Oxford University Press, New York, and now it's perhaps available in India as well. So this is a lecture devoted to his memory. This is the 6th lecture. They have been given, it started with Ananya Vajpayee, the youngest of them all, Shiva Srinathan, Pratap Bhalu Mehta, Ramchandra Guha, and Rami Jehabekilu. I need not introduce ASHIS Nandi. Your massive presence creating us some seating problems already is evidence that he is a very popular, perhaps an embodiment of contrary thinking as well. Ashish Da has, over the years, questioned, has become a major voice of intellect and ideas in our country. And he has critically looked at many aspects of India in its phases of modernity, Gandhi, popular cinema, cricket, at the issues of post-colonial imagination and sensibilities, secularism, violence, religious diversity, and fundamentalism. In fact, again, unusually, Ashish Da was engaged in a long conversation in Hindi with Udayan Vajpayee, and that conversation has been published in the latest issue of Samas, again a journal published by Raza Foundation. Copies are available for buying outside on the table. So we have Dr. Ashish Nandi, sharp at 5 to 7, sir, we start. Would you like to speak from there?
Yes, I shall prefer that, being a Bengali.
Yes. Can I brief you with a...
Oh, thank you. I feel privileged that I have been invited to give this lecture in honor of Professor Daya Krishna. Ashok has already given a brief thumbnail introduction to him. I would just like to add that I have met in my life many who have been dissenting scholars themselves, but who do not like other dissenting scholars who dissent from them. So, Daya Krishna's exceptional quality was this, that he did tolerate them. That was his uniqueness. Frankly speaking, I was looking forward to giving this lecture and reading it. I drafted a lecture, but yesterday I came to the conclusion that it was not good enough. So I will mostly try to talk extempore, might read here and there a little bit. I think my basic point of departure is a biopsychological fact that everybody knows, but few are aware. Namely, that we can control our memories, we can remember by setting up props to remembrance, ranging all the way from an alarm clock to remind you of a particular appointment you have, all the way to mausoleums and museums to remind you. Remembrance can be supported, remembrance could be anchored, remembrance could be built upon. But we have no control about our forgetfulness. It is not given to human beings to deliberately forget. If you try to forget something, it comes back to you with a vengeance more frequently. Many times people want to forget, and there are now psychopharmaceutical drugs which may not induce forgetfulness but numb your sensitivities to some extent, bind your anxiety, and which allow you to manage your shock or sadness or unhappiness. But that does not mean that you forget. That means that you are only temporarily managing your what you want to forget, the consequences of not forgetting, but you cannot control your forgetfulness. This is what I am going to offer you is a way of looking at this play of forgetfulness and memory, and I hope it will make some sense to you, because the city in the title of the lecture is basically a mythic or imagined city, a city of fantasy, a fantasy city. It is not a city of real life, but it has impact on the city of real life in different ways. This is not something unique to the city. Many other spheres of life you can find these kind of things. But the lost cities, I have a specific meaning I ascribe to lost cities. The lost cities are not found in urban histories, ethnographies of cities, or in works of town planners, except occasionally by default. They can be found in public memories and in surviving myths of cities. Their natural abodes are grandparents' tales, dated travelogues, less self-conscious memoirs, and works of art and literature. lost cities are lost in two ways. And that's two main ways, I should say. Lost cities can be lost in various ways, but there are two main ways in which lost cities are lost. One is, it can be lost, a lost city can be lost like the way Jerusalem was lost for 2000 years to the Jewish population of the world, particularly the diasporic Jews. But it can be also lost in the sense Hiroshima is lost. But I think Jerusalem qualifies as one which can sustain the idea of a lost city for its admirers. Over 2000 years it has sustained that. Whereas Hiroshima has nothing to fall back on except the tragedy which made it notorious or famous, whichever you want to look at it. Hiroshima doesn't have a lost city associated with it. Jerusalem has. Elsewhere, after this, I will might touch upon Jerusalem again to show that the Jerusalem, after you recover Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is rediscovered on the foundation of a reality that it has become the capital of a nation state, then what happens to the Jerusalem of the mind? What happens to the standard way all Jewish rituals and all thanksgiving to the Yahweh ended with next year in Jerusalem? That Jerusalem had to be a mythic Jerusalem, but nonetheless that is absolutely crucial. In fact, you can claim, it is possible to claim that this Jerusalem, the real city of Jerusalem, which is going to be now against the wish of most of the world, majority of the world, the capital of Israel, is not capable of sustaining the lost city of Jerusalem, which was a kind of a beacon to an oppressed people dreaming of liberation. This has become a new Jerusalem where you have control over Jerusalem. It is the capital of a garrison state armed to the teeth, who also have reportedly exported the pellet guns to our army, which has blinded fully or partially nearly 100 Kashmiri youth, many of them teenagers, 12 or 13 years old. But that's a different story. I don't want to go into it. But that is the way Jerusalem's career as a lost city for the Jewish community has ended. Jerusalem is now a lost city for the Palestinian Arabs. If you read Edward Said, most of you have done that, you know what I mean. If you read his autobiographical writings, it becomes absolutely clear the difference between Jerusalem as a lost city and Jerusalem as a capital of a nation state. I will leave it at that. There are two kinds of lost cities I have in mind, because I am restricting the meaning of lost cities. I am not talking of old cities. I am not talking of cities which had a long history of 2,000, 3,000 years, like Kranganur, which is now Kochi in Kerala. You would see mentions of it in Roman texts. And Pliny once complained that Roman gold is being wasted on a useless things like black pepper. so it has been there for a very long time. But it exists as a mythic city, as a lost city for the Jews of Cochin who have migrated to Israel. And one of them told me that when in Israel, we may be in Israel, But when we are in Israel, we always have in mind coaching. Nobody can forget coaching. So in every festival, every ritual, they come to Cochin to celebrate it. There are families like that in Israel. I met them. So that's one kind of lost city. The second kind of lost city is when somehow or other a significant proportion of a city decides to live not in the city as it really is, but the city as it once was. As it once was. If Lahore is South Asia's most well-known lost city, Calcutta is a city which lives in the 19th century. Psychologically, the Calcutta has 1 foot in 21st century and 1 foot in 9th century because it considers those the golden age of Calcutta and finds this Calcutta, reality of Calcutta, partly unbearable. This is an escape route probably. But it is not even seen as an escape route. It is seen as equipping Calcutta with some specific qualities which are not there, which is partly in the imagination. But that is also another way of having a lost city. You choose which century and at which time you want to live. Many years ago, Ravi Mathai, who was the founding director of Indian Institute of Management in Ahmedabad, told me his experience in a village where he has started an NGO. It was a village of a caste identified with the Chamars. All of them were leather workers for entire village. And they used very primitive techniques. To him it seemed looked like primitive techniques and had no concept of what kind of thing they should produce for the market. They produced for nearby villages and that was that. So Ravi Mathai introduced there in that village new technology. He gave them access to the market and gave them managerial support and financial support in the sense of financial accountancy services for them to modernize. But every time he went to the village, people complained to him about an old man, old cobbler who had not changed, who refuses to use new technology, refuses to go or reorient its designs to what the market demands, and refuses to be guided by managerial experts. So Ravi decided to go and talk to him. It talk went in expected lines. Ravi said, "Why are you against change?" He said, "I'm not against change, but I'm changing, but I don't want to change the way others change. I want to change in my way." So Ravi said, "No, but you see, the others are progressed. They are prosperous. Your own brother has become very prosperous. Don't you think you can bring up your family better?" He said, "Yes, I know my brother has become prosperous, but I noticed that his anxiety and worries have increased because many of the things he is doing, he cannot control himself. He has to take help of others. And therefore he is constantly tense. What will he do and what will he should not do, what design he should implement and what designs he need not implement. He cannot decide that. I decide everything myself." So Ravi was desperate. He said, "Everybody says that you live in the 19th century. The old cobbler said, I decide in which century I want to live. Ravi said, I learned something that time. I learned something. I had gone to teach him, but I found he had taught me something. I think it is similarly, this, people sometimes prefer to stay in other points of time. They choose their own reference group, they choose their own, what you might call constituency, and so on and so forth. So that is another kind of thing. There are other ways of going to, I might come back, but both these qualities are to some extent inheritable. Heritable. In the sense that it can pass on from generation to generation, particularly if these feelings and attitudes and fantasies are shared by larger sense. It might not last very long. When I came to Delhi 55 years ago, now 50 years ago, soon after, some years after coming to Delhi, I began to visit India International Center and became a member of some years later. I used to go basically because at that time, under the portico where they now serve tea or dinner, and then just next to the reception, they had a table tennis table, and we could play table tennis. So that's what one of my attractions. Anyway, so at that time, I came across a group of something like 50 to 60 persons at least, probably more, probably 60 to 70 would be more like it. People whom others called the Lahore Club. These were elderly people who always talked when they met at India International Center about Lahore and their memories of it. Now I had talked to some of them and their memories were quite repetitive and often overlapped. By the time I met them, I thought that they should have already gone tired of repeating them to each other, because each one knows what are the stories that the person is going to tell. But nonetheless, they met every week. That group, I don't see it meeting for the last 1 or 2 years. It has, in any case, dwindled to something like 5 or 6 people. So, memories of lost cities are also heritable. They sustain it. And surprise of surprise, that when I asked in Lahore, some young people, what was the book on Lahore they would recommend to me? Because I had a small collection and also found 1 or 2 rare ones, like an East European or Russian, some woman who has worked on Lahore. I found that when I asked them what book they liked, most of them said the best book is Pran Neville's book on Lahore. Now, Pran Neville's book on Lahore is not the best book by any scholarly account. No, it's quite, many would consider it quite mediocre. But when this happens with the next generation of young Lahoris who have never lived in pre-war Lahore, then it has a different kind of meaning to you. Then you want to find out why it is so. And you are likely to look at now Pran Neville's work. I also interviewed him at some length and found that perhaps it is that lost diversity and the lost melting pot of cultures, contact zone of cultures, you can call it, not melting pot, sorry, I correct myself. The contact zone of culture, where cultures meet and exchange or quarrel, or there is a dynamics of cultural interaction. And that gives a certain liveliness which even in a book like Pran Neville's book on Lahore, which is basically a laudatory book on old Lahore, captures something of it and hands it over to the next generation as a gift. They have found it. Pran Neville didn't hand over, that's the wrong way of putting it, but they have found it. They didn't like the more scholarly works because they didn't capture that part of the story. They studied the way urbanologists and ethnographers of cities study it. They didn't serve the needs of the younger generation of Lahoris who were looking for something else, certain clues to why Lahore has ceased to be the kind of epicenter of the intellectual life in the whole of North India, whole of the subcontinent, you can put it that way. So there is this part of the story also. This heritability is beautifully illustrated by a poem which I will not read it full, but I have taken a few lines to give you an idea. This is by one poet called Beo Zafar. I don't know how she get the name Beho. B with the E with an accent, so it's Beho, I guess. French, it's probably a French name. I don't know. Probably she's an artist or something. And this is what she writes, these few lines. 6 decades, and then I stand on the land of my forefathers. An hour and a bit is all it took to get me here. A lifetime's wait behind me, and in my eyes the tears. I set aside the pain and just become my parents. I set aside the pain and just become my parents. Their memory line. I think it beautifully captures the idea of heritability, which I am trying to introduce into the concept of lost cities. What are the origins of such a city? I mean, there must be multiple origins, many origins. But I have a feeling that lost cities are proliferating in a world where large-scale ethnic cleansing and large-scale displacement are taking place. Partition itself threw up at least 6 major lost cities. Lahore, we know of, already I mentioned it. Calcutta, not only for the Calcuttans, but also for those who have migrated to Bangladesh. You know, a brigadier of the Pakistan Army, in a book written to explain the loss of Bangladesh to Pakistan, said, I knew this will come someday, because when I went once and was lecturing to the Bengali intellectuals, I told them that you must forget Calcutta. You are all the way talking of Calcutta. What is happening in Calcutta? Which one person is writing what in Calcutta? You are only negotiating Calcutta. So one of them stood up and said, Sir, Calcutta is our Mecca. And I knew that day that Pakistan will lose Bangladesh. Anyway, that was an argument's explanation of the loss of Bangladesh, but we don't have to take it too seriously. But but partition did create half a dozen lost cities. I never knew that Hyderabad kind of had lost self. But there are internet sites on Hyderabad which Hyderabadis will not recognize, where people are constantly talking of the old Hyderabad. Many of them staying in Pakistan, many of them abroad, and Telugus now have a huge diasporic population. Many of them are in the United States, and they also meet and discuss Hyderabad, the way Lahoris discuss Lahore. Hyderabad has entered the game. There is Lucknow. Once again, Lucknow is no longer that Lucknow. For those who are from Lucknow, that is the ultimate city. You know, both in the Calcutta sense and also in the sense of Lahore. So I want to go back to that dichotomy I have made. India has itself had the displaced for the sake of development in last 70 years, approximately, this is an old data, about 10 years or 15 years old, 60 million people. And they too have left behind often cities behind them. Most of them are not from cities, so that we have to remember also. But also in the process, they have also created new kinds of lost cities, which are associated in their mind with certain qualities, which may not exist anymore in that city. The point I'm trying to emphasize is this: the lost cities are always partly autonomous of the real life city. It has to be autonomous. Lost cities influence real life city, but the real life city does not influence the lost city that much. Maybe marginally it does, I don't know, I'm not 100% sure, but I don't think real life city influences it. It has an autonomous existence. So if you interview people who have come from Dhaka after partition, Dhaka is a lost city for them. That is another city contributed by partition violence. The lost Dhaka, is absolutely must have been a very addictive city. The people have died with the dream of going back to Dhaka, exactly as many people have died with the dream of going to Lahore and has not managed to do that. Sometimes when you come to know some Pakistani minister or other kinds of power holders, then he might facilitate visa, and some of the people do get to see. I know a friend whose father he took to Lahore because one of the ministers facilitated it. He met him in a seminar in Delhi and used that connection to get a visa to take his father to Pakistan. And his father, his father said, nothing has given me more pleasure than that visit. And that's what one expects. This proliferation of lost cities also has another side. That's why I asked me the question, what are the origins of lost cities? I think they have also come back, and whether we recognize it or not, we sense somehow their presence. Nobody staying in Delhi can miss out on the addictive nature of the idea of Lahore. No, nobody can miss it. Yeah. Similarly, nobody can miss the addictive nature of Dhaka. And when I go to Bangladesh, when one of the earlier visits, I once asked my Bangladeshi friends, why are these Jamaat people moving around with me all the while? What have they found so interesting about me? But they just want to come and talk with me and wish me and want to sit next to me in the conference. So he said, that's easy. Most of the Jamaatis are from Calcutta suburbs or Calcutta itself. And the Bengali you speak is that Bengali. So they feel comfortable with you. Because they are identified in Bangladesh immediately as persons who have come from somewhere else in India. So there is that part of the story. But the thing I want to say that all these factors have contributed, this displacement has contributed to new kinds, not only new kinds of cities, but to an acceptance of the idea that there is something beyond what we call scientific rationality and positive sciences or knowledge, or positive knowledge in general, positive science, not positive knowledge. It means there is a new place being created for the concept of mythos, new place of mythos. A mythos which will allow us to negotiate what we see around us. Because the older urbanological approach, older dependence on museumization of cultures and civilizations is unable to cope up with or keep up with the new kinds of Satanism all around us. So they're looking, for example, a mythic structure, a different kind of psychological structure in which you can locate your values, your ethics, and what you consider to be your duty to resistance. Resist what you do, your norms of your faith, what you are resisting, like that cobbler I talked about. This is the thing, this return of the mythos. This is not exactly a post-World War II phenomenon, or if for that matter, even late 20th century phenomenon. This had come earlier once also, and many of these things are actually also trace their roots to the 1920s and 30s, the interwar years, when also the mythos had returned in a different way because of the shock that the First World War had created, because that was the first World War and people were not accustomed to see that kind of butchery and that kind of loss of youthful lives and devastation either in Europe or in the other participating countries. So that was the time when Freud moved away from the positivist justifications of his new science of mind, psychoanalysis, to a larger vision which he had earlier avoided as not that well grounded in scientific principles. That famous exchange of letters with Einstein, why war, is one of the examples of what I have in mind here. That is, civilization and its discontents is another. That later Freud, for the first time, dares to venture into quasi-philosophical world, crash into it. He was not even a psychologist, by the way. He was a neurophysiologist. But here he crashes into this world of civilizational concerns and begins to come out with new formulations about human destiny. Now, Tagore, who all his life had believed that our theory of liberation will come not only from Indian past, but also from some of the strides made by Europe, because Europe also has its own set of liberating principles. But the two world wars, he wrote this book in the last weeks of his life, in 1940, the Second World War had already broken up. He says, I was mistaken. That civilization cannot anymore be the guiding spirit of the new world we envision. A crisis in civilization, that's the wrongly translated. It should be crisis of civilization, because that's the Bengali titles from Bota Shankot. The Tagore says, and he says a moving testament, his last testament, which he wrote from his sickbed. That crisis of civilization we are facing needs a different kind of world. And I do suggest that a return to the mythos and return to the idea that human mind is capable under certain circumstances may not be able to resist what obtains in the real world, but it should be able to retain for yourself in the privacy of the mind your ethics, values, and your genuine political choices, not the electoral choices, political values, choice of political values, in another form, in a mythic form, which is not accessible to the thought police of regimes. I hope this has some relevance to India of today. This time, now that. Delhi also has a lost city. Actually, some say 7 lost cities. But people do not distinguish. The consumers of lost city do not distinguish it. But they are interconnected in this Dalrymple's book, The Jinns of Delhi. That is the best book he has written. I don't want to tell him that because he has written other nice books, but that captures, a lost city must have jinns and ghosts of a different kind. Calcutta Governor's House, which was originally the Viceroy's palace, is ridden with ghosts, I'm told. I've often felt like asking Gopal Gandhi, that did you really encounter any ghost there? If I'm not encountered, you have not met, actually. You have not been in Calcutta. Because those ghosts are famous, or notorious, whatever like. So, in the 7 Dillys are connected in Dalrymple's narrative in a kind of a vague, unified, mythic Delhi. And that Delhi is for many Delhiites the real Delhi. That kind of Delhiites are going down in number every day. But the late Khushwant Singh used to tell me, whenever he talked about Delhi, I wanted to talk to him about it. I did talk to him a few times. He always talked of that Delhi. He talked of Delhi as a garden city. He talked of Delhi as a place of learning, of Urdu culture, so on, which is now vanished. He talked about different communities by their caste names, which are not fashionable to do. So, Kayastha community of Delhi, caste of Delhi had a special role in that. Sikhs had a special role. It's fantastic. It's a different Delhi he talked about. So, but let me at this point also give you 1 or 2 warnings that exactly as why Hiroshima cannot have a lost city, or Tokyo cannot have a lost Tokyo, because their past is so much associated with destruction and trauma that the trauma has occupied the space a lost city might have occupied at one time. Hiroshima was nothing. Hiroshima was a small town. Just forget that. But Tokyo certainly had a different kind of past. But I think the destruction of Tokyo in 1944, by aerial bombing, which killed more people, many people don't know this, killed more people than were killed in the atomic bombing of Nagasaki, and equaled the number of people killed in Hiroshima. That in one day the whole thing was razed to ground, virtually. So what you see is a new Tokyo. But that past is associated with trauma, is associated with defeat, it is associated with authoritarianism, a military adventure. So there is a kind of inability to mourn also that past. As to borrow a term from the Mr. Lick couple who wrote a book called on Germany called Inability to Mourn. There's inability to mourn. So that doesn't yield a lost city. Pompeii cannot yield a lost city. It also was lost to tragedy, but the tragedy overwhelms whatever might have been the past of Bombay. Bombay is now become a tourist place. It has its museums. It has story of the tragedy which overtook it. But that's about all. It doesn't have a lost. There's no sense of loss. Rome might have it, but not Bombay. So there are some limitations to where you cannot have a lost city. Probably one clue to this, another clue to this kind of cities which come close to being lost cities but cannot be, is a work by a young Japanese scholar, Akira Nishimura, who compared Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the contemporary culture of the two cities. He said about Hiroshima that it is a culture of indignation. Hiroshima is indignant that it was targeted because it didn't have a military past. It didn't have a military significance. In fact, now we know from American records that the army people were opposed to bombing of Hiroshima, saying that city has no military significance. Why should we bomb it? Admiral Lee writes in his autobiography this. But the scientists were very keen to bomb Hiroshima. They were looking for a place which had not been touched by Allied bombing during the war, because then they will get a perfect measure of how much damage a nuclear bomb does. So scientific rationality can go both ways. So I'm emphasizing this idea of inability to mourn partly because these kind of situations do not allow a lost city to emerge. A city which will be the kind of a receptacle for your own vision, values, and political choices. Hiroshima has this peace movement there, and there's a peace university. That's about all. Anyway, this Nishimura says that Hiroshima has the culture of indignation, that what has been done to it, and rightly so. But Nagasaki has a culture of prayer. He subtly implies that there is a guilt associated in Nagasaki with what Nagasaki was. One positive sense and one slightly negative sense. Nagasaki was a city through which 2/3 of Japan's trade was conducted with the West. And it was a city most exposed to Western influences and to Christianity. A sizable section of Nagasaki's population were Christian. And all three were held to be culpabilities of some kind. So Nagasaki, some residents feel, that's probably Nishimura hints at, that they felt that they were guilty of something. That's why the bombing took place there. And it is a city of prayer, he says. Nagasaki's attitude is a city of prayer. More so because Nagasaki had also tried to once detoxify the Western influence and influence of Christianity in Nagasaki by crucifying 26 Western and Japanese priests of Christian priests. So they have also that, as a sense of guilt about that also. Anyway, so there are cities which have all the reasons to have a lost counterpart, a lost self, so to speak, enshrined in the form of a lost city, but they do not actually have it. Only a few have. And I do believe that there is in this a certain poetic justice, because to return to a lost city or take refuge in a lost city is not always easy. Or not always easy. It is not easy for the cities which are I'm identifying as lost cities in this part of thing, which are not amenable to this kind of constructions, even though some have painted them as a lost city. If you read Sarasan Manto, Bombay is a lost city. But it is only to him that it is a lost city because he was with the entertainment industry. And he is very nostalgic and yet very, I should say, very interesting formulations in where of that identification of the principles on which that culture functions. But it was only him. Bombay doesn't allow anymore that kind of. It might be still for many overseas Parsis, the diasporic Parsis, the capital of Parsi culture in India, and they might consider, maybe they have some idea of a lost city of Bombay, where the Parsis predominated in the cultural sphere as well as intellectually in many ways, and that is possible. But I am not going into that for the moment. Louis Mumford, probably the person who most seriously explored the culture of a city and wrote very creatively on cities, once said that the city, he's talking of the real life city, the big city is responsible for the invention and public extension of the museum. There is a sense in which one of its principal functions is to serve as a museum. It goes as far as that the principal function of a big city is to serve as a museum. In its own right, the historic city retains, by reasons of its amplitude and its long past, a larger and more various collection of cultural specimens that can be found elsewhere. I am tempted to agree with this, but I do not. Because this presumes that the salvation of a city and its great ongoing function is to actually museumize and collate cultural fragments and organize them and systematize them. A museum, if you go into it, has an order and a way of doing it that is standardized. If you go to any museum, it always begins with the primitive and then gradually moves towards what we are today. Even in the ambitious museum of what you might call indigenous art in Paris, this new museum. If you see, they cannot avoid that temptation. There is always that part of the story that you move from primitivism to postmodernity. As you move around the museum, you also traverse your own past. I do believe that the mythic city I am talking of, look at differently. As all past, it looks at all past and all future at meeting this moment, here and now. Because the past is a construction in our mind in terms of our needs today. And these needs are not economic or social only, they are also psychological. We are often only partly aware of what our needs, how it colors our historical enterprise and collects our museumized cultures. And that part of the story, that step-by-step evolutionary movement, the social evolutionism of the 19th century, which played havoc in the world, because three-fourths of the world became backward and one-fourth Illich once said, it took 20 years for 2 billion people in the world to recognize they were backward, learn that they were backward. It didn't come easily. Nobody had thought of it that way. We think ourselves as backward. Here, a mythos has no time frame. Can you hear me? It is working? Yes. A mythos has no time frame. Mythos is not bound by history. And mythos is not bound by the historians who are then in turn slaves to the archives, as if archives are not man-made and all perfect. I believe that all enterprise of evolutionism, particularly social evolutionism of the kind Herbert Spencer, etc., brought to India with great fanfare and they developed an entire set of admirers, from Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay down to our newfound Marxists in the 20s and 30s of this century. The social evolutionism is, my favorite quote is the one which Engels wrote to Marx once, or Marx wrote to Engels, I forget now. This was when France occupied Algeria and colonized it. So when Engels wrote to him that, the monk said, good that Algeria has been colonized. Now it will join civilization. Because now Algeria, I think, has a history of 2,000 years of civilization, at least, probably longer. I would be tempted to say 2,500 years. France's own history of civilization is much shorter, much shorter. But then that's the way the world is. That's the way the world is. I am suggesting that in the discovery of the mythos of the city, it is a prototypical discovery of the idea of mythos itself as one of the guiding principles of human civilization. And I think this correction was necessary at this point of time because 20th century has proved that the pathologies of reason have now probably, I'm not saying with absolute certainty, but probably overtaken the pathology of unreason. When we criticize a astrologer who cheats you of 20 rupees by offering to tell your future, or maybe 200 rupees now, maybe the bird picking up a card and on the street corner. But when the corporate structures sell us eternal youth, the cosmetics industry, eternal youth, and the doctors sell us painless life, then that is $1 billion business. That's $1 billion business. Jitendra Bajaj once told me that there was a report he found in one of the pharmaceutical companies, MNCs in India. This person writing from UP to them. These people are so backward in UP that they don't even have headache. It is very difficult to sell them aspirin or dispirin. In this kind of the astrologer, at one time, it is old data, about 30, 40 years ago, the data, that the cosmetic bill of American women was larger than the total budget of all the African countries taken together. But that's an old story where maybe things have changed. So I suggest to you that beware. Yes, it is good to resist superstition and irrationalities, but do not forget the greatest satanisms of 20th century was conducted in the name of scientific rationality and pathologies of reasoning and pathology of scientific rationality. Thank you very much for your patience. It depends on you. It depends on you. Whatever you say. Up to you.
Friends, there's some time you need to answer questions. Let them be brief, if possible witty, sharp. Don't give your opinion. You're here to hear the opinion of ASHIS NANDY. So, the mic will reach you. Raise your hand. The first one has to be a little, yes, lady here.
Look into this.
So you said that Tokyo and cities like Hiroshima and Nagasaki couldn't be lost cities because of the traumatic past. But isn't a city like Lahore also doesn't it also have a traumatic past with the level of genocide? So how is that a lost city, right?
No. Lahore had a large communal violence and bipartisan communal violence because the city was had a large Muslim population, all right, but a very large Hindu and Sikh population, and the Sikhs were very well armed. So it was not that traumatic. I'm talking of a trauma where, in one day you flatten the whole city and kill about something like 110,000 people. That's a different kettle of fish. You look at it. That trauma overwhelms the memory. What I'm saying is that the past is associated with that trauma. The trauma overwhelms. In Lahore, that trauma doesn't overwhelm. They know it. And also, do not forget, this holds true of the partition itself. That partition, everybody knew, including the victims, that it was a bipartisan event. Kuldeep Nair, who has just died, has told me one of his saddest moments in life was when he was escaping from Pakistan. And he was in a vehicle passing. And he was at one place, there was this huge caravan of Hindus moving away from Pakistan. Small babies, old people, there are some being carried on their shoulders, and a huge caravan. And suddenly from the other side comes a huge caravan of Muslims running away from India. And each one made way for the other. And Kuldeep says, Kuldeep probably expected some clash or something, not one person said anything. There was sadness written on the face on the participants on both the caravans. Utter sense of sadness. No, they passed by. So everybody knew that it was bipartisan. So that is a different kettle of fish. That kind of trauma also can be, it's enormous trauma. I have studied partition, so I am well aware of it. I am not denying that. But it is also a fact that you do not see the emergence of it has not resisted, or it has not broken down the ideas of other kind of ideas, other kinds of visions of life, other kind of alternative set of values. It was people explained it in different ways. They knew. This Nadira Naipaul, you can call her, because he was married to V.S. Naipaul. She once told me of her grandmother. Used to every night scream, "The Sikhs are coming, the Sikhs are coming, they will kill us." Because she had seen herself the Sikhs butchering Muslims and she is scared naturally. So when she was on her deathbed before that, Nadira asked her, "Dadi, आप सिखों पे बहुत नाराज होंगे." She said, "नहीं, उस वक्त वो भी पागल हो गए थे, हम भी पागल हो गए थे." And that is a very common refrain in our study too.
Sir, when a landmass that consisted of 9 provinces and 565 princely states, how do we define if that landmass goes through a fundamentally systemic change when it is formed into a nation state which it earlier wasn't? How do we classify only 6 cities as lost, whereas the whole landmass went through a completely fundamentally systemic change? So how is there a criteria to actually define which cities should be considered as lost cities and which shouldn't?
Criteria is spelled out, I thought. It may not be perfect, you might have a different kind of way of classifying it, but I have spelled out from the point of view of what I think is psychologically significant. What country will be fundamentalist and when is very difficult to say. If you are talking of Pakistan, I guess you are. I might also point out to you that first generation of Pakistani leaders was far from being fundamentalists. They had made use of fundamentalists. They made use of fundamentalists. Exactly as our present regime is making use of fundamentalists, but he is not a fundamentalist. The top leadership is not fundamentalist. That was the case with Jinnah and Liaquat Ali Khan and Jafarullah Khan. They were all, very distinguished, very learned, and very successful men who knew what they were doing. I mean, I have many grudges against them, but I cannot, absence of knowledge or fundamentalism is not one of them.
I didn't mean as a religious fundamentalism as an ideology that prevailed. I meant that as a nation state, as a state, when this whole landmass, even India and Pakistan, as a landmass goes through a systemic change from the British Crown to the independent state of the Union of India, how do we classify cities? How do we classify particular cities as lost and
I spelled that out.
Yes. Anybody else?
Thanks for a nice lecture, sir. I just wanted to ask, I was just wondering out loud actually, there is the asymmetry between this idea of lost cities versus lost villages. I'm wondering whether
Lost
it can
city
be a
and
lost village.
Yes, yes.
I'm asking in the context that there is an amnesia attached to very idea of capitalism itself, where modernity cannot imagine anything something pre-modern. And forgetfulness plays a role on both the ends, where forgetfulness also is a quality function from which cheerfulness, from which happiness also emerges, and it also sort of bridges on the other side where it deals with amnesia and suppression and those kind of things. So I'm wondering, where do we sort of find the lost village in this?
No, I have not deliberately brought it in because I have studied that also. I mean, in my, and we will probably, I have written about that also. The reason is simple. I wanted to deal with cities. This is a part of I wrote earlier a paper called Cities of the Mind. Cities of the Mind, the darkness and the shadows. where I dealt with mainly slums and criminal sectors, down market city, so to speak. That, and this time I wanted to talk about a city that is unreal city, but so it's complete the picture. So this is that. What you are saying is true, and it is a larger part of the story, because in the study of partition violence we did, a huge proportion of the people mentioned their village. And in the case of village, they were very positive beliefs. Extremely, though, even people who you will not think about, talking of their village with any degree of fondness. Madanlal Pawa, for example, who was the assassin of Gandhi, we had interviewed him. And at the beginning, he spoke the standard language which you hear from Hindu nationalists on Gandhi. He's supposed to have said to the police when he heard from them that the Gandhi has been shot dead, "Bola acha hua sala mar gaya." Acha hua sala mar gaya, buddhe. But he ultimately looked back on his village in Montgomery district, and it had Baba Farid's dargah and the qawwals who sang there. He even in his 80s tried to sing out some of the qawwalis, few lines, what the qawwals sang. He was an entirely different person from when we started. At the beginning, he was all full of bombast, and then he claims that he was a humanist, and the values he espoused was basically the values of the person who he hated and conspired to kill. That also is a part of the story. And this is also the story I have also had another writing of mine I have taken from Suketu Mehta, who went and interviewed this person in Delhi, the B.L. Sharma Prem, who was absolutely abusive when he talked of Pakistan. He wanted to go back to Pakistan on a tank with the Indian Prime Minister on a tank. And he talked about it. He said, Hindu mothers produce rats. That's why we lost Rawalpindi. That's why we lost Lahore and Karachi. And the Muslims eat beef, and it's aphrodisiac. That's why they're always after Hindu women. So beef eating is bad. He said all these. But Suketu didn't take one interview and go away like journalists often do. He stuck with him. And after he has exhausted this repertoire here, gradually it emerged that B.L. Sharma Prem had a Muslim wet nurse. And as long as she lived, B.L. Sharma Prem sent her money. And he also shared with Suketu Mehta the information that he, because he didn't want to share it at the beginning, because he had a different constituency whom that other language of his is very important. He said that he also had Pakistani friends and went and stayed with them secretly twice at Pakistan. I do not know whether Suketu asked him whether he had eaten beef with them.
Yes.
Is there in your classification or measuring of lost cities, is the constituency or the number of people affected of importance? Like I would take the example of Srinagar, Kashmir. And in the current, for the Kashmiri Pandits, it is a lost city in that sense. But since it's not a majority, would it constitute a lost city in that sense?
No, when I mentioned Bombay as a possible lost city for the Parsis, they can never be in a majority there.
Yeah.
So that's not what I'm saying. All I'm saying that those who are holding the cities in the lost city must have a sense of autonomy from the real life city. That's the criteria.
So then
It's not so that it allows you to invest your emotions, your values, and your reading of the world in that city. It carries that load. I mean, whether Lahore was really that kind of a city or not, we do not know. And we will never know. Whether Calcutta was that kind of a city they are claiming to live in, we do not know. When Malcolm Bagaris says that Indians are only surviving Englishmen, what he means that is only surviving Victorians or Edwardians. Huh? So that's true. In England you do not meet them. If you go to Gymkhana Club in Bombay or Gymkhana Club in Bengal Club or Calcutta Club in Calcutta, you meet them. You meet them all the while. You know Victorian England is living.
To what extent, sir, is the idea of a lost city amenable to manipulation by projects such as the nation state? Israel is a good example. Lutyens Delhi, Sardar Subha Singh's Lutyens Delhi is a good example. Amravati, Telangana today might be a good example. And the second part of the question is, to what extent does immigration change that idea of lost city?
No, it doesn't change it, because it will not become a lost city. That it has to develop over a period of time with certain kind of thing. It's very difficult to. Yes, this engineering you are talking of, lost cities are cities which defy or resist that in the social engineering part of the story. It's not amenable to our control because half of it is unconscious. Those who hold lost cities are themselves often not aware that they are talking of another city which is no longer there.
Last one.
I was just wondering, what would you make of Aleppo? Would it be the next lost city?
That's difficult. I don't know. I cannot predict. I can see
because both the destruction has been terrible, but the greatness of that city is absolutely imprinted in Syrian minds.
Yes, that's true.
In 2012.
It might survive it.
The ones in Damascus could not talk about Damascus, but they were talking about Aleppo all the time.
That's a very interesting thing. I mean, yes, maybe it will survive. Yes. That's the last, huh?
That will be the last.
Oh, I'm lucky then. I'm an old Delhiite and struggling to be how my parents were. You mentioned the violent or the violence which was instructed in Hiroshima. But what about the silent violence which I am facing? And I quote, I forget it is Suketu Mehta or Rohinton Mistry, that hell has a very uncanny habit of penetrating into the thin membranes of heaven. And that's what is happening with me. I am trying to struggle to live in old Delhi, with my old culture, with my old, ways, but I am unable to. This silent influence which is not letting in, me do that or to live in that. What's your take on that?
That's difficult to say. I know my take will not help you.
What's your idea about
But I grant it. I mean, the diversity is feared now in this society. In India now, we have come to fear diversity. We think we are too diverse. Because India has always been very diverse, and we have celebrated that. And I believe that something of that is going away, because a sizable middle class, and I hold the middle class responsible, that a lot of them are actually not middle class. They are middle class money, but not middle class values. The middle class has expanded from 50 million to now there's talk of 300 million, 6 times. But my guess is that probably we are stuck with a middle class of something like 75 million, 100 million at most. And the rest are middle class money, but not middle class values. Not even hypocritically. Not even hypocritically. In other words, in Bengali households, they would keep 20 volumes of Tagore, and some CDs of Ravi Shankar and Vilayat Khan and Bada Ghulam Ali Khan, and then they think that cultural duty done. You know, they're middle class, proper middle class. But I don't see that is going away. That is going away because there is no, then people are unapologetically pop cultural. I mean, nobody reads Tagore at home, those who keep it. They might be listening to Tagore songs a little bit. That's that. That you have to keep it. Anyway.
But he said this is the last, but the lady will be the last.
Okay.
Sir, can we make this argument that
Yes. No. Take the mic, otherwise.
so sir, is it only a city of mind where you just escape for some time and it's a temporary kind of city which you don't want to project on on a distant future. You don't want to make it into come into existence. Is that the idea?
No, that's not true. That I might tell you that. That's not true. It can be, they don't come, they do not make that distinction between reality and fantasy. They live in that Lahore. If you talk to Khan Neville, you are left in no doubt about that. Because he also organizes music of that period. He also organizes films of that period. And he has found people who sing Saigal songs, Pankaj Malik songs. Huh?
He's connected to the whole lot of great CDs.
Yes, that's right. So it is an attempt to hold on to that. But one doesn't know. Yes, some of it is not heritable, some of it will probably go, but some of it will stay. Otherwise, I don't see any reason why in Pakistan they hail Lahore, which has changed dramatically and has not that, it is a very different city now. But I don't think that's the way it goes, because some people still hold on to that, because this city of the mind, they see as a form of resistance to the city on the ground.
Well, friends, with that, we come to the end of the 6th oral lecture. Thank you very much, Dr. ASHIS Nandi, for giving a brilliant lecture which has evoked such questions. Hopefully, many questions remain and will be articulated later. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming. Continue to come to these lectures. They are well worth attending. Tell your friends. If you still talk to your friends and don't doubt their integrity.